Welcome back to the Psychophiles podcast. I'll be your host today, Marshall, and I'm kindly met today by Anu Oluwatayo. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's really good to have you. Thanks for reaching out and agreeing to come onto the show.
No problem.
Tell me a little bit about what you do at the moment. What's your day to day?
Yeah, so I'm currently working as a research coordinator for the Connect study at the University of Manchester. I'm also an aspiring clinical psychologist. So yeah, sort of day to day, I work in the research projects that we're working on at the minute. It's a observational cohort study. We're looking to see if we can predict relapse in psychosis in advance of it happening using digital tools. So things like a smartphone and a smartwatch.
Really?
Yes. So the idea is that we can collect passive data about people. So like their sleep or their steps or heart rate, things like that, stuff that a smartwatch usually collects anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd like to correlate that with information that they self-report about their mood and their symptoms to try and see if we could predict with just the passive data alone if someone's relapsing in psychosis. Wow.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So you can take variables that you wouldn't otherwise think anything of, just passive day-to-day variables. Like you said, it's like sleep quality. Was that one of them?
Yeah. So these are all early warning signs for psychosis relapse.
Right.
So these are things that are already documented and have papers on regarding its relationship with relapse. So we already know that if someone's not sleeping for a while and they already have a diagnosis of psychosis and they've not been sleeping for a while, it might suggest that maybe they're struggling with their mental health and they're going to go into a relapse. By relapse, I mean psychosis sort of comes in waves, like ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
So it will be like you get a diagnosis because you've had an episode, and then you might have a period of stability where you're not, you don't have that episode anymore, and then it comes back in waves. So we're looking to find that point where the wave is about to start again, basically, and use the data from a smartwatch to find that. So yeah, it's already known that these things, physical health things, predict that the relapse is about to occur. And smartwatches already collect that sort of data anyway. That's what, smartwatches do. They already count steps and look at your heart rate and things like that. So why not use that data to try and integrate it into the mental health system?
So what are the implications if you, I guess people have a better awareness of how certain variables are correlated with a relapse in psychosis. How can that apply to their lives and how can they actually take action on that information?
Yeah. So the research is Professor Sandra Bucci's research. I'm just a research coordinator on it, so I don't want to talk too much about it and go into it too much. But by sort of being able to monitor your mental health using something like a smartwatch, it just allows you to have a better grip on it and understand it a bit better. If a service user already knows themselves that if I'm not getting enough sleep or if I'm, not doing enough steps or things like that, then it might mean that my mental health is going to get worse, and they can monitor that by themselves just using the smartwatch. Clinical teams could also use it by the person monitoring their monitoring their physical health, and then letting their clinical team, know or have access to that. And then their clinical team might be able to see when that's going to happen as well. But I don't want to get too much into it. It has a whole future plan for what they'd like to do with the research, but it's not my research, so I can't go too into it. But that's the idea. The gist is that if you're monitoring your mental health, I keep saying mental health, if you're monitoring your physical health, then it might suggest what's going on with your mental health. The two are linked.
Yeah.
So it's sort of just encouraging service users to monitor their physical health and sort of look for patterns.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that these kinds of projects tend to have many different phases?
Yes.
Right. So
so the research it's been in the works for 10 years. So it's had a lot of different other studies suggesting these sorts of things. Digital monitoring is already being researched and has been for a long time. So Connect sort of builds upon that. The idea that you can use digital tools to monitor mental health and the integration of digital tools into mental health. And then it's in its cohort study phase at the minute. So it's currently live. We're recruiting participants to take part to test the monitoring system.
Yeah.
then it would have future phases where they try and refine it, build an algorithm. So it's going to be like, in the works for a long time, and it's already been in the works for a long time.
Okay. So when you say cohort study, is that a little bit like a pilot study?
No. So a cohort study is like not an RCT, basically. It's an observational study. It means that everyone who is recruited to take part will undergo the monitoring system. So it's not like your control group and your intervention group. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's everyone's taking part in it.
Yeah.
So we just are getting as many people as we can. It's got a huge sample size. It actually aims to recruit over 1,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah. So hoping to recruit over 1,000 people, and everyone taking part is testing the monitoring system.
Right.
And it's just to see if we can relate the two. So participants are reporting their symptoms to us, and then they're also using the smartwatches to monitor their physical health. And the study at the minute is just looking to correlate the two and see if it's possible to correlate the two, basically.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
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 So you were saying basically people they take their own observations of their symptoms, and you kind of correlate it with those physical metrics like sleep quality and steps.
Yeah.
How do they record their symptoms? Is it a standardized kind of quantitative thing, or is it
So we have
qualitative?
different ways of doing that. So we have the app that's been developed. So we have an app that you can get on the App Store. It's been developed for this purpose, for people to monitor their symptoms. So they would, report if they've been feeling low, if they've been hearing voices, if they, had beliefs that they felt were stronger than usual, and they're answering those questions every day in the app, and we're trying to monitor them. It goes on for a year as well. So we're trying to monitor them for that year. And they'll be reporting that in the app. They'll also report it to the researchers directly. We administer a semi-structured interview with them. We have a range of different measures that we use. And also measuring symptoms and just trying to collect as much data as we can about their psychosis, basically, and whether they do relapse in that time. And then they will just be collecting their own passive data automatically by wearing a smartwatch as well.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, I guess it's still quite early might be a bit too early to hypothesize, but when it comes to steps, is the idea that you predict people to have a lower step count when they're about to relapse, maybe because of like depressive symptoms?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's, the affective symptoms that come with psychosis, and it's an early warning sign for a relapse in psychosis that if someone's about to relapse, they're not going to get out of the house as much. They might socially isolate themselves. So that means they're not going to be doing as much steps. And there's loads of research, as I'm sure like everyone knows, about the relationship between exercise and mental health.
Yeah.
So the more steps you do, the better your mental health is supposed to be. So
I guess that's an interesting point, because it's kind of what causes what. So when people start to have worse psychotic symptoms, does that make them do less exercise, or do people do less exercise and it causes their mental health to decline?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's kind of just like a cycle,
Yeah.
isn't it? You get caught in that cycle of my mental health's getting worse, so I'm going to isolate myself, and then I've not left the house in 2 days, so my mental health gets worse, and it's like that vicious cycle, isn't
Feedback
it?
loop, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So how long have you been in this position for?
I've been in this position for a few months now.
Okay.
So I was working as a research assistant before on the same study, Connect,
Right.
and then now research coordinator.
So how have things changed? Quite a lot, right?
Yeah, quite a lot, I would say. It's because it's such a huge study, and it's not just recruiting in Manchester. We have different university sites all working on the same project. So it's going on in Scotland, at Glasgow and Edinburgh universities, in Wales at Cardiff Uni, and then down south in London at KCL Uni and Sussex as well. So because it's such a multi-site study and there's so many different researchers working on it, my role hasn't shifted that dramatically in terms of what I do day to day hasn't shifted that dramatically. We're all sort of working together at a collaborative level. So me being research coordinator doesn't dramatically change what I do that much, but it does change it in some aspects. I think it's probably a little bit more busy than it was before for me now.
Do you have maybe more admin responsibilities and things like that?
Yeah, it's mainly like management, admin, sort of like recruitment. I do a lot more, or have more responsibility around recruitment and things like that. But we've always tried to work quite collaboratively in our team, where the research assistants and the research coordinator are almost, don't want to say the same role because they're not, but it's like they're almost the same role. They're working very similarly and we're all working to a common cause. So, yeah.
So remind me, how long were you doing the research assistant work for?
I've been a research assistant on Connect for over a year.
Right.
And then before that, I was working on a different study at the university in the division of social care and midwifery and nursing, a study called SASHI, which was the self-harm.
I've heard of that, yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, in South Asia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of that,
yeah. Exactly, yeah. So I was working on SASHI. I was at RA there for maybe 6 months or so. Yeah, so I've been at the university for probably over 2 years now.
Right, okay.
Working here, yeah.
So it was SASHI and then it was Connect and then
Yes, yeah.
Right. So you're kind of moving up the hierarchy a little bit as well. That's pretty cool.
Sneaking up there.
Yeah. So you were a
bit.
student before this, right?
Yeah, so I can give my whole sort of history.
Yeah, let's start from the start.
If you like. I can start from A levels. So I did A levels. My intentions was to do medicine. So I chose my A levels as chemistry, biology, psychology, and maths. Quickly realised that I'm not good at maths and I really struggled with it. Within a couple of weeks, I dropped maths and took just the three, chemistry, biology, and psychology. And that's when my love for psychology started, basically. And I sort of realised how interesting the human mind is and behaviour. And so I sort of switched routes and decided I didn't want to do medicine anymore and instead wanted to pursue a career in psychology. I then did my undergraduate degree at University of Essex. I did psychology with cognitive neuroscience. I really enjoyed that. I loved the neuroscience aspects to the course. I found brain anatomy really interesting, and that was something that I really prioritized in the course, and I thought that was going to be my new route. So I thought I was going to go into neuroscience rather than psychology. I did the degree and basically came to a sort of crossroads where I was trying to decide, do I pursue clinical psychology or do I go into neuroscience? And I ended up choosing clinical psychology because at the time I felt it was more of a stable career path. I don't think I fully understood what a neuroscientist would do or what I could do with a master's in neuroscience. So it was sort of like it was a bit of a random choice. I didn't really know either way what was going to happen. I also didn't know about the doctorate in clinical psychology and how difficult that is. I just thought I'll do my master's and then I'm a psychologist and that's done. Yeah. Exactly. So that's the route that I took.
If only it were that easy.
If only it were that easy. If only I knew. That's the route that I took. And then I started my master's here at University of Manchester in 2020 doing clinical psychology.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, you made the right choice then, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, sometimes I do think, I wonder what would have happened if I decided to do neuroscience and where I'd be now. I'd still be in research though. Yeah. So I've kind of just gone.
That's like the career path really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think I didn't really realise that I would end up in research. I didn't know that that's sort of something that I really enjoy and how it feeds curiosity. I think I naturally had that curiosity at that age when I was deciding my master's, but I didn't realise I could make a career out of that curiosity, basically. I did my master's in clinical psychology here, and then I just loved the city and I thought I might as well stay. So I started working. My first job in Manchester was as a SEN TA.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which I really, really loved. It's my favourite job that I've had, actually. Yeah. It was brilliant.
For anyone who doesn't know, that's a special education, a special educational needs teaching assistant.
Yes, exactly, yeah. So I was working with primary school age children with a range of different difficulties, but they were all brilliant in their own ways. So that was a really great job. I did that for a year. And then I worked as an assistant psychologist for Elysium, through SASHI and then Connect. So that's kind of my whole...
And here we are on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Journey so far.
Yeah. Tell me about your master's degree, clinical psychology.
Yeah. It was really good. I actually did it in COVID, to be fair. So I started in 2020 and graduated in 2021. And the whole thing was remote. I didn't actually get to meet anyone from the course. We had group chats and things like that, but it was very isolated. Yeah. I didn't really get the experience that I think other people would have had on the same degree. I think my cohort was quite unique. But I really enjoyed the lectures, and many of the lecturers have come up again in my career now that I'm working in research.
Yeah, sure.
I'd seen lectures from Gillian Haddock, who I now work with on Connect, and Dr. Daniel Pratt, and there's lots of different researchers who were professors, doctors who were teaching on the course.
Peter
at the time.
Taylor?
Yeah, Peter Taylor. Yeah, he was brilliant. Louise as well. Louise
Shirley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you do the masters as well?
No, you just get quite well acquainted with people when you do a podcast.
Yeah,
I just do my bachelor's degree.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
My
In
second
psychology?
year. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Nice.
Me and my co-host, well, one of them does psychology with neuroscience, but she couldn't make it today either.
That would have been cool.
Yeah, so that was the same course as yours, right?
Yes.
Psychology with cognitive neuroscience.
Cognitive neuroscience, but it was basically just neuroscience. I always wondered, maybe I should have actually known that really, why it was cognitive neuroscience, but to me it just felt like neuroscience.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that's really interesting. But yeah, it was a unique cohort, but the teaching was brilliant nonetheless, and it was quite interesting to actually get a qualification during the pandemic when the whole world was on pause.
Yeah.
It sort of felt like my life continued to move forward and it didn't really affect what was going on. I was sort of in limbo about actually doing the course. My thoughts were to defer it and wait a year so that I could make friends when I came to the city. And because I was living in Essex and then moving to Manchester, I didn't know anyone. But I decided I'm just going to do the course through the pandemic. It means that I'm, more decorated. I've got another qualification in that time, and it will just help me continue my career, past the pandemic. So that was what I did.
Smart.
Yeah. It was a good shout at the time. And it was an interesting sort of like fever dream almost. Like it wasn't real, but it was. And yeah, it was really, really brilliant to get to meet those researchers.
Yeah.
I keep saying researchers, doctors and professors who I now get to work with in research.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's great.
Brilliant.
So was the master's a combination of taught content and exams and then like a research project?
Yes, exactly that.
it
Yeah.
is.
So yeah, we had your thesis that you're doing, and then at the same time doing teaching and exams. Yeah.
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 Did you enjoy the teaching? Did you feel like you learned a lot about clinical psychology?
Yeah, definitely. I felt like I learned a lot. I think the only thing was it's harder to engage an audience when it's remote.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. So I think there was times when it would have been more engaging if it was in a lecture hall.
Yeah, for sure.
But I still thought it was brilliant teaching. I learned a lot about the profession and sort of like my understanding of what a clinical psychologist was. I didn't know what the doctorate was as well until I did the master's, and that's where I heard about it and decided that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I kind of didn't really know the difference between a psychologist and a therapist before the course as well, but I feel like the course does a good job of sort of defining the roles in terms of leadership and of the research aspects of it, which is so important, as well as the clinical aspect. And then assessments, interventions, and then, of course, learning about the different types of difficulties that people face. So I really felt like it broadened my understanding of clinical psychology, definitely.
For sure. Yeah. For my benefit and for anyone listening, could you actually elucidate the differences between psychologist and a therapist and what it actually means to be a clinical psychologist?
Yeah, definitely. So a psychologist, like I was saying, a psychologist does assessments. So they can assess and diagnose people. They can also do interventions, so do therapy the same way a therapist can. But a psychologist will usually work at a leadership level. So they'll be leading other professionals as well as assistant psychologists. They'll be guiding them, supervising them. So it's sort of like a managerial leadership role, as well as getting to do therapy with the service users and also being able to assess and help with that sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but sort of like identifying the issues that people face. That's sort of like more what a clinical psychologist does.
Is that formulation? Is that the word?
Formulation. Yeah, exactly. I was looking for it. Yeah. Okay. So like formulating the psychological issues at hand, basically. That's what a psychologist does. But then they do also do therapy similar to a therapist as well. Yeah,
that makes sense. So that's the master's, and then you worked as an assistant psychologist after you graduated.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So I worked so hard to get that AP role. I'm sure, as you know, they're super competitive. So I must have done about 10 different interviews. I did quite a few different interviews, countless applications. And finally, I managed to get this role, and I felt really supported in the role. It's a rehab centre run by Elysium, and it was my first time getting to work in an MDT. So I got to meet a range of different healthcare professionals, and again, that just helped me understand everyone's sort of different roles and how they all come together to support the service.
It's a multidisciplinary team, MDT?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, multidisciplinary team. I keep talking in acronyms.
Yeah, I just had to infer that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Multidisciplinary team. So people of different professions all working together to formulate and to help service users. Yeah. So the rehab that I was working in had different conditions in different wards. So I was assigned a ward. The ward that I was working on was for males, and it was meant to be a low stim sort of ward for people with autism and on the autism spectrum, Asperger's, that sort of realm, but ended up being a mixed mash of all different types of people with different conditions. So it was nice for me. I got exposure to lots of different people. That was my first experiences with psychosis as well, and getting to meet people who live with psychosis, and sort of actually sparked my interest in that condition because of how individual it is to each person. And how you kind of never really see it presenting the same. So yeah, that was a really interesting experience. It definitely had its challenges, as clinical work always does. And you know, you're working in an inpatient setting. It's underfunded. It's low staffed. People are burnt out. So it had its struggles. But I do think there was a nice camaraderie within the team, and everyone was sort of lifting each other up when the other was down, and yeah, it was really nice, and I met some brilliant service users as well.
Yeah.
So
Well, do you have any memorable or interesting stories or anything like that? Don't worry if not, because I have more questions.
yeah, I do.
It's an interesting population to work with.
It's such an interesting population to work with. Yeah, and like I said, with psychosis, it really presents so differently with each person. Some people have really positive experiences with psychosis as well. I met a service user who felt like they had a presence of a guardian angel with them all the time. And that was something that they became... Is that all right?
The best thing you can do is move the microphone towards yourself rather than...
like this?
Yeah.
Is that too close?
No, not at all. That's
Okay.
fine. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, a guardian angel.
Yes, a guardian angel. Yeah, I met a service user who believed that he had a guardian angel that followed him everywhere, and that was a super positive and comforting experience for him. And it also made him more religious as well. It meant that he started going to church and reading the Bible and adopted faith because of the presence of this guardian angel. And I know psychosis has a bad rep sometimes, and people think that it's really dangerous, and like, you know, it's always like super dangerous, basically. Experiences that people have and beliefs that people hold that they're going to be like, you know, they shouldn't be a part of the community or a part of society because it can be seen as dangerous. But this is a really good example of someone who felt comforted by the condition and who was definitely able to function in society with it, and actually, you know, kind of uplifted them in a way.
Yeah.
So I think that it's really individual. It's such an individual condition. And yeah, that's when I first started to be interested in it. And yeah, that sort of, sparked my curiosity a bit.
So your clinical work and your research work has focused on psychosis a lot.
Yeah.
Is this something that you want to keep focusing on throughout your career?
Potentially, yeah. I think it's something that I've grown to find super fascinating. So I think I might do. I really want the opportunity to work with more client groups.
Yeah.
And to test that, basically, and see if there's actually other things that fascinate me more. And my curiosities do tend to change over time. Like, I started off really liking neuroscience, and then as I started working clinically, I then started being more interested in psychosis and mental health. So I think that my curiosity might change again. I think that if I get the opportunity to do the doctorate in clinical psychology, where you get a range of different placements, then I don't know. I might end up really enjoying my psychosis client group, or I might end up, working with people with different conditions and be really interested in that. I have also been quite interested in autism as well. I did do a couple of autism assessments when I was working clinically, and I always thought that condition was quite interesting as well. So maybe that would be, if I got to work with a client group more closely in the future, then that might be something that I would take an interest in as well. So I don't really know. It depends on what experiences come later for me, really.
Yeah, it's very early in your career.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. I have so many questions. In your assistant, I guess because it's relevant to me, because these are the things I'll be thinking about in the
Yeah,
future.
brilliant. Yeah.
In your assistant psychologist role, you said you felt quite supported and you were contributing. Do you feel like you were able to contribute in a meaningful way to the actual service that they received and have a say in conversations about service users?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the structure that we had at the rehab I was working at was quite good in that the assistant psychologists were on the ground, we were on the wards with the service users, and then we would spend quality time with them, find out what's going on for them, bring as much information as we could to the formulation with the MDT. And then they would be asking us, what do you know about so-and-so? How have they been this past week?
Yeah.
So a lot of it was dependent on what information we could gather, and our rapport with the service users. Rapport was kind of essential for us to be able to, make proper breakthroughs, because if a service user feels safe and comfortable with you, then they'll tell you truly how they're feeling and thinking, and then that's when you can start to properly formulate. When you know how distressed they are or how not distressed they are, then that's when you can properly, see the full picture. So I feel like our role was really essential to the MDT, and I definitely felt heard, and
Interesting.
Yeah, 100%.
So when you were doing these formulations and assessments and speaking to the service users, was this like a one-to-one kind of client-facing role?
Yeah, one-to-one.
Yeah.
So we had one-to-ones with, so we were all assigned our own wards. So I had one-to-ones with most of the service users on my ward, and then we would bring that information back to the MDT.
How did you feel in your first few days of the work? Was it quite overwhelming?
Incredibly overwhelmed. The imposter syndrome was huge.
Yeah.
Massive. I was so overwhelmed, and I really didn't feel like I was good enough or qualified to be there. But you always have to remind yourself in those sorts of situations, if you weren't qualified, you wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I did. I just kept pushing through. And when I started to have breakthroughs with service users by spending lots of time with them and building up a rapport, and then we were able to create, effective care plans and see their progression and stuff like that, it makes you realize that actually I am qualified. And a lot of it you're learning on the job as well. You're learning practically. So I feel like you're always going to come to your first day and be like, I don't feel like I'm ready to do this, because you've not had the opportunity to learn anything practically yet. So yeah, that's completely normal. And I feel like a lot of people in psychology suffer with imposter syndrome moments, because you do take such big leaps. You sort of go from theoretical knowledge in your degree to now I'm working with a service user and I need to ask them questions and find out how they're feeling, and and then there'll be other big jumps in the future for me as well. Like I feel like the first day I get to do therapy with someone, I'm going to be like, I shouldn't be here. Like I can't believe this.
I don't know how to help this person.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about learning practically, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
I can really imagine that with all the theory and all the research that you do, to sit across from a person who's a human being that's so unpredictable, that has history that you'll never ever know enough about, and personality traits that you'll never know enough about to truly know that person.
100%.
It's a completely different story, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you just sort of, you just have to go with what's happening at the time and sort of adapt to the situation. I feel like when someone starts to open up to you, you're naturally just going to ask the right questions, because it's just two humans having a conversation at the end of the day. And yeah, I feel that the more you settle into that conversation and the more it happens, the easier it gets. And before you know it, it's like it's nothing. So, yeah.
So, assistant psychologist. And then there was the research assistant on the SASHI project,
Yes.
right? So what kind of work did that involve for you?
Yeah, so SASHI was, I started working on SASHI when it was nearer its end. We were sort of closing down the study. And it is the acronym stands for self-harm. No, it doesn't. It stands for South Asian Self-Harm Initiative. So the idea of it is to create a categorization of deliberate self-harm incidents that were happening in India and Pakistan. So people were turning up to A&E and they had deliberately self-harmed in a multitude of different ways. And the research assistants here in Manchester were basically categorizing all of these admissions and trying to work out what were the common reasons for the self-harm and common methods, just so that they could use that in their hospitals so that when people came to their A&E, they were able to provide support faster and were more equipped for the sort of common issues they were facing, if that makes sense.
So the research that you did was to support the hospitals basically in their care for the patients.
Yeah. So there was a lot of back and forth, international liaisons with the practitioners in those hospitals. And they were working with University of Manchester and the University of Bangor to create a categorization of these occurrences. And they were using paper notes as well. So they were scanning their paper notes. Right, so
it was text, it was like conversations.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was like, so someone would turn up and they'd be like, this has happened to them, date, time, and they might ask them why. Sometimes people wouldn't say why, sometimes they would. And it was all just written into like a notes book. So they were just trying to make sense of all of these notebooks that they had. They weren't finding patterns because everything was just on paper. So someone would show up one week and then someone would show up the next week with the exact same incident. And they wouldn't know how to deal with it, even though they've just had someone like that the week before. And it's because they didn't have like an electronic system that would remind them of what's going on, or like they just didn't have an idea of how much these things were happening and the common things that were happening.
Yeah.
So it just meant they could be more equipped because they then knew, because in India as well, there were certain methods that were quite popular. I don't want to say popular, but they were just like common. They happened a lot. So that was usually things like pesticides. A lot of people would drink pesticide. And that's because they were readily available at shops. So you could get something that could be lethal at your shop. So that would be a common occurrence. A lot of people would turn up to A&E with that issue. And they just weren't well equipped for it because they didn't have the records to show how much that was happening, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just helping the staff to know what to expect.
Exactly.
So they won't be surprised and kind of they don't know what to do in this situation. So this was a process of categorizing incidences so you can kind of measure how often certain things happen and find what's the most frequent.
Yeah.
So it's really a quantitative kind of analysis.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was a quantitative analysis. It was qualitative in some aspects.
Yeah.
We did have a look at the reasons as to why. A lot of people wouldn't give it a reason. There is sort of cultural considerations in that research because a lot of people didn't feel safe to be able to say that sort of thing. It also can bring shame to the family. So yeah, they wouldn't want to tell anyone. They wouldn't want to admit that it was done on purpose. It was self-harm. They would, maybe say it was an accident. So we were looking at it qualitatively for reasons and trying to sort of analyze that. There was a thematic analysis going on for the reasons, as well as the categorizations of the methods quantitatively.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And is a lot of that work kind of remote? You kind of get on your laptop and do it wherever? Yeah,
it was a completely remote role. So I think I came here to the campus maybe 4 times or something like that throughout the, I think I was on it for 6 months or 7 months.
Just to pick up your staff ID card?
Yeah, literally, staff ID card. We did do one meetup of the research assistants where we all sat together. We were all coding together in a room. But usually it was completely remote. So yeah, and I wasn't participant facing. I didn't get to see any people.
Well, it's an international study, yeah.
Yeah. And that was one of the reasons why I was so excited to start and Connect, because it's participant facing and I get to see service users. So
that makes sense, yeah.
But I did love SASHI and I thought it was a really interesting project. I really learned a lot about India and just other cultures in general, and the sort of comparison to the Western world and the way that self-harm can be seen as so stigmatized and, not talked about at all. Whereas in the Western world, I feel like it's more openly spoken about and there's less stigma around it. So it just sort of opened my eyes to that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we pretty much covered everything up to now, unless you can think of anything we missed.
No, I think we've got it. Yeah.
But I do want to ask, what's next for you in your journey?
Yeah. So I'm hoping to eventually become a clinical psychologist. That's the goal. So have been applying to the doctorate in clinical psychology, which has lots of, reputations within the psychology community. So a lot of people will know about it to be quite difficult. It's super competitive. In the year just been, in 2024, it had 22% success rate. So 22% of people got on. The best year was 2022, 25% got on that year. But other than that, it usually sits around 20-ish%. So yeah, it's quite difficult. I've been trying to do that for a while. So I've just submitted my third application now. My first application I did when I was working in the rehab as an assistant psychologist. And then my second application I did when I first started Connect. So now is my third one. I feel that the whole process of doing applications over and over again has its benefits and its cons. I feel that it does build you a lot as a person. It really builds resilience, which is essential for clinical work. But then on the downside, it can also sort of affect your self-esteem a little bit, maybe feel like you're not in the right career or you're not good enough. So it's a difficult process. It's an interesting process. I can talk about my 2 applications so far, the first 2, because I had the results and they're all done. The third one is we don't know what's going to happen with it. So the first time I applied to Manchester. Where else did I apply? University of East Anglia, which is in Norwich, Bath University, and King's College University in London. And I didn't know anyone really at the time. I was working with a clinical psychologist, and she provided my reference for it. You need to get 2 references for it. You need a reference from someone who knew you at university, usually an academic supervisor.
Okay.
And then you need a reference from someone who knows you experience-wise, and it's usually quite good if it can come from a clinical psychologist.
That checks out.
Yes. So I got my reference from her, but I didn't understand really how much support you should have for it. I felt that it's just an application to a course, right? It should be fine. Yeah. So I didn't have anyone look at my application. I think I wrote it in about maybe a week or something like that, and just submitted it, fingers crossed, hoping for the best. I didn't get any interviews from any of the universities. So I really had to reevaluate where I was going wrong. You also don't get any feedback.
Really?
No feedback at all on your applications. So,
I guess they have so many.
Exactly. They have literally thousands of applications, so it would be impossible to give feedback. But it does leave the applicant in a difficult place where you have no idea where you went wrong or what to do. And we're all technically qualified. I mean, most people who apply to the doctorate are going to be technically qualified. Yeah. To be qualified, you just need to have done an undergraduate degree in psychology that's accredited by the BPS. And then you need to have worked 1 year in a clinical psychology relevant job, which of course is up for debate what that is.
Yeah, that's really vague.
Yeah. So I would have said at the time I was relevant. Some universities, I was qualified. Yep. Some universities might say that I wasn't qualified. I mean, it depends on how you see it. I'd been a SEN TA at that point and then also an AP at that point. So I thought pretty qualified. Pretty good to me. Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't get any interviews and just started reflecting on where I'd gone wrong. And I really think that the reason that I struggled to get an interview in my first year was because of the lack of support. I think that the key to the doctorate is to know other people who have successfully completed it or have got onto the course. So by knowing other trainees or by knowing a psychologist and working together to create your application, I think is kind of the key to it. And I sort of went at it alone. And I think that might have been why I didn't get my interview the first time round.
Do you think at least in your experience, the psychologists are generally quite keen to help
Yeah,
applicants?
100%. Yeah. Every time I've asked a psychologist to help, they've always been brilliant. And I think it's because they want to see other people be successful
Yeah,
and make it.
they're
So
clinical psychologists,
yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah, just expand the field. So I think that yeah, if you were to ever ask anyone for help, even if you asked other trainees as well, they're always super up for helping as well. I think it's just knowing to ask for the help, because it's easy enough to think that all I need to do is write about my experience and I've got it.
yeah.
But in actual fact, a lot of people will be getting help and advice from other people. So if you're going at it alone, your application will be much weaker in comparison to someone who's
Sure.
got the help that they need. So yeah, then my second time around, I decided to do that. And I knew a lot more researchers. I knew people from SASHI at that point, because I'd worked on SASHI and then left SASHI at that point. And then I'd also just met more people. I knew more people in Manchester. I knew more assistant psychologists. So I decided I would get help, and I sent my application out to lots of different trainees that I knew from different areas of life. Ended up sending it to, I think, about maybe 6 people in total. I sent it to literally every clinical psychologist I knew. And then I think I faced the other issue with the applications, where you send it to too many people and it sort of taints your voice in your application.
Too many cooks.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened for me, I think, on the second time round, where I sort of thought to myself, I was too isolated the first time. So this time I'm going to surround myself with as many people as possible. And the more advice I get, the better the application must be. But by the time I'd submitted the application, it wasn't as I would have written it myself, basically. And it had different voices, different suggestions. And I think that's when I sort of learned the importance of knowing what advice to take and knowing what advice doesn't need to be added, basically. And I think that was, an important learning curve for me. I think when I submitted that application, I thought that I must definitely get onto the course this time, because I've had so much help and all of these people have got on the course, and how could I not? But yeah, I think that's what happened, sort of like a loss of my own explanation of my own life, of my own experiences, because no one else can explain that in the same way that I can. So when people try to do that, it just doesn't sound like you anymore. So that time round, I applied to Lancaster, Manchester, East London University, and can't remember the last one. But it doesn't matter anyway. I got an interview at Lancaster. So that was really interesting. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you can see the progression there. So yeah, and that was super interesting. That was a really great experience. I got to go to their psychology department and did the clinical interview there. The interview is quite interesting. It comprises of different tasks and different things that you have to do. So you do the main interview, where they sort of ask you about your clinical skills and your research skills. And then you also do a series of different tasks, like watching a video and then commenting on it, or doing a task with a service user. And things like that. And yeah, it was a brilliant day out for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even if I didn't get onto the course, I definitely left the day feeling like I'd had a good day, and I'd met a lot of interesting people, and I felt like I built my network a bit. So yeah, really had a great time then. Then I got onto the waiting list for Lancaster. So I was really close to getting a place, but not close enough, unfortunately. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was that for me. And then now we get to this year. So I've just submitted my application again. I've applied to Lancaster again in the hopes to get another interview this time. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think this time I really sort of took that balance between not isolating myself and my application and not smothering myself with too much support.
Yeah.
So I showed it to only one trainee that I knew, and then there's a clinical psychologist who I work with currently. And that's it. And I'm very happy with my application this time.
Good.
We'll see how it goes. And I do think that it's a steep learning curve, the doctorate. I think that it really sort of allows you to reflect. It creates this reflective space for you each year
Yeah.
where you're able to see how you've progressed and how different you are from last time. And, it just allows you to reflect. There would be no other reason to think so deeply about your career and
Yeah.
what you want to do and why you think you're going to be a great psychologist if you weren't applying to the course. So that's something that I've always appreciated from it. And yeah, I think it's designed to almost be a tough process on purpose to sort of create resilience in the applicants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah. I feel like it might be done on purpose, or maybe it's not, and it's just so competitive because so many people want that title, and it does have a certain prestige around it. So perhaps it's just competitive because of its prestigious nature. But yeah, I'm feeling optimistic about this year's applications, and we'll see how it goes. I do enjoy the process as a whole, even though it's difficult and there's times where I'm like, oh, I can't believe I have to apply again. But I do enjoy the reflective aspect to it and just being able to see my own growth and being able to tell something like this, like the fact that you can sort of see the difference between application 1 and 2 and how 3 will go. And so, yeah.
Yeah. All that being said, I know you mentioned your experience with getting support and having a good balance there, and also being reflective. Do you have any advice for people that are applying to the doctorate?
Yeah. I would 100% say definitely get some support. If you're working with a clinical psychologist, you should get them to read your application. I don't think you should submit the application without anyone reading it. I think if you know any trainees, maybe get 1 or 2 who you're close to read it. What you shouldn't do is just get every trainee to read it, or get every psychologist to read it, because, like I said, it will start to taint your voice in it and it won't sound like you anymore. The application's actually quite short. It's in characters, it's not in words. So it asks for 1,000 characters for the first question, and then a couple hundred characters for the next 4 questions, and it's only 5 questions long. So the application is a short application in itself. And if you get a lot of different people to look at it, then before you know it, every word in that could be, advised to change, amended, and things like that.
Yeah.
And even if you do get this advice to change things, you don't need to feel like you need to take it as well. You know your experience the best. No one knows it better than you. And sometimes people might give advice that actually doesn't suit your application. So you need to kind of understand what it is that you're trying to get across in your application, and then keep that in mind when you're getting your advice, and not just take advice because it's been given to you.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's quite hard to actually reject advice as well, when you've approached someone and asked them for help and they've given you help and you feel like obliged to take on what they've said, but sometimes it doesn't match what you're trying to say. So that's something to really consider. So I think that's super important. Getting support is super important. And then I would also say really consider the courses you're applying to. Consider what it is that they're teaching. Every course has slightly different modules, slightly different placement structures and things like that. So you want to consider what it is that you're going to learn, what are your interests, and usually the courses will look at applications and think, does this person match our university? So if you choose a university that you have interests in their course, then you're going to match their course, if that makes sense. Like, you will match them because you're interested in the things that they are teaching. So you want to look for your match in a university, basically. And then, so that's really important. And the ethos as well. So different universities have different ethos in terms of what they value in their trainees, in the course itself. So do they value sort of like a holistic approach with service users, or do they value high levels of research experience, or do they value a range of different clinical experiences? Like, what is it about the course that is what is it that they look for, and what it is that they value and care the most about, basically. So you want to consider that as well, because the courses are looking for you to match them. So it's important that you're choosing courses that make sense to your experiences and the person that you are, basically. I would also say that the universities differ in the actual entry routes. So some universities will do an entry test. Some universities just do an interview and they don't do an entry test. If you're the sort of person who does well on a test, they're usually like sort of multiple choice tests could be about research, could be about statistics, could be about just clinical work, or it could be writing like a research proposal, or it could be deductive reasoning test, which is sort of like your ability to organize things or make deductive reasoning decisions. So I feel that if you're someone who's good at tests, you might want to choose one of the universities that does a test. It would increase your chances of getting an interview. If you don't like tests and you think you wouldn't be good at that, then maybe choose a university that doesn't do a test. So these are all important things to consider. I think when I did my first application, I was definitely thinking, where do I want to live? That was my main thing. And that's why I chose London as well, like central London, because I thought that would be really fun. And, you know, I'm going to be doing this course for 3 years. I want to live somewhere that I enjoy. But I do think that choosing a university that suits your experiences and your application is the most important part of the doctorate application.
You don't really get to choose where you live.
Exactly. Like, you might just have to live somewhere you didn't really want to live.
Yeah.
Or you might get to choose, you know, somewhere that you really wanted to live. And you might get onto the course anyway. Like, I think all of this is pedantics and it's quite small in the, you know, if you're super qualified and you have a really well-rounded experience, then it doesn't matter. You could apply to any university and you could still get an interview because you just meet everything that you could possibly need. You have everything you could possibly need to get an interview. But I think most people who are applying aren't like that. Will have specific types of experiences. Some people might be really clinical heavy and have a lot of AP experience but no research experience, or like my application, I'm more research heavy. So this year I was looking at universities that value research a lot and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's little pieces of advice here and there. But yeah, I think that considering the type of university course that they're offering and the modules on that course are really important in your decision. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah.
So we have advice for everyone who's moving forward now with their applications.
Yep.
I'm interested in just going back to your work with Connect. That's right, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And your assistant psychologist work. Can you name or can you describe things that you've learned about mental health and about psychosis? Would it be possible to give us an idea of what psychosis is like?
Yeah.
And what maybe you're more likely to see if you work in those kinds of roles?
Yeah, 100%. So I kind of see psychosis as like a misalignment of reality, where like the person's reality is misaligned from the true reality, basically. And that can come in pretty much any shape or form. So it's usually the classic hallucination, so seeing things that aren't there or hearing things that aren't there, and the delusional beliefs. So believing things that aren't real or can't be real, basically. And then it will come with its negative symptoms as well, it's called. So things like emotional blunting, which is where like you don't really feel your emotions as strongly, or loss of communication, so like just physically not being able to get the words out anymore. And then it can also come with disorganization, mental disorganization, so like not being able to organize your thoughts properly in your mind. So that really presents in completely individual ways.
Yeah.
I've never seen psychosis present the same twice.
Yeah.
And I've met quite a few different people who experience the condition. But I do think that it's not always a negative experience, like I said earlier, like that guy with the angel. And then I've met lots of other service users who just have, you know, small things, almost like relatable things. Like, you know, if I was walking down the road by myself and I felt like someone was looking at me or someone was watching me or following me, I might look behind my shoulder. And like, you know, that's something that most people have experienced before in their life. But if you're experiencing that frequently and it starts to become, the music's so loud.
I'm going to mute my microphone while you continue talking.
Okay. Yeah, so I feel that what was I saying again? Can't remember.
You often might have like you look over your shoulder.
Yeah,
but-
exactly. So you look over your shoulder. But if there's someone who's experiencing that severely, so it's affecting their life, they're not leaving the house anymore because they're so scared that that person who was looking over their shoulder is, outside their house or something, then it suddenly becomes really debilitating and, it can really affect someone's quality of life. So I think it has this spectrum where it's like experiences that pretty much everyone has all the time. And then it's how it affects your behavior, how it affects your functioning, and what you take of that, and how preoccupying and overwhelming it is basically for you, as to how how much psychosis you're experiencing. But I think the idea of paranoia and things like that are really normal. Like, people experience paranoia all the time. It's the severity of it that defines how much psychosis you have, or if you have psychosis, I suppose. And then there's also, I was going to say something else and it's just slipped my mind then. But yeah, I was going to say about delusional beliefs. So I feel like the categorization of delusional beliefs has always been quite controversial in a way, because it means you're making a subjective decision about what is delusional. For example, if you go to a church, my parents are Pentecostal Christians, my mum is Pentecostal Christian, and they say at that church that I've heard the voice of God, I've heard the voice of God, God has spoken to me. So if you say that in that setting, that's completely normal and everyone agrees that's great, that's something to be put on a pedestal. But if you're in a clinical setting and you have a diagnosis of psychosis and you say, I've heard the voice of God, then suddenly everyone thinks they're hallucinating, their symptoms are getting really bad, and it's seen as a negative thing. So I think all of it is really subjective, and it uses a lot of categorization that is quite, controversial at times. But I think that the experience is really individual. It completely depends on the person and their life experiences, their past traumas. It all plays into it. That's a little bit on psychosis.
So, would you say that the most common kind of hallucination is auditory?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Have you had any
Voices.
experience with service users with visual hallucinations?
Yes, yeah, I have done.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of sensory hallucinations. So
Yeah.
you can have olfactory hallucinations, so smell. You can have taste hallucinations, and then
Really?
yeah, definitely. So you could have sort of like bad taste in your mouth, or really nice sweet taste in your mouth, like all sorts of different types of hallucinations. There's also skin, tactile hallucinations, so feeling something that isn't there on your skin. So yeah, any sensory modality you can hallucinate in 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because I've had some experience with people with psychosis. I've worked as a support worker in the
Nice.
bank at a mental health care home
Brilliant.
in Manchester. And a lot of people there, the people who are there long term tend to have psychotic illness, like schizophrenia. And I have less of a psychological perspective because I'm not working in a psychological team. I'm working as a support worker. So it's kind of
Yeah.
just working with their care plans and making sure that people are fed and showered and stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is important work, but I'm always
Really
left.
important.
Yeah, but I'm always left really wondering like what it would be like to have a team of psychologists or a multidisciplinary team with social workers and psychiatrists and stuff working together with these people, which I'm sure does happen. It's behind the scenes and stuff that I'm not really involved with. But
Yeah.
there was one service user that I have become quite familiar with, and she's lovely, and they're all lovely, but she I don't know what other comorbidities may be happening, but she shakes a lot, and her, especially one arm, and she tells everyone that it's because her arm is possessed, and she has various stories and various explanations for why her arm is possessed, and
Yeah.
she's cursed because she did something wrong a long time ago, and that changes a lot too. And there's a couple other service users with similar kind of things, similar delusions, persecutory delusions a lot as well.
Yeah.
And for the most part, from what I've heard from other support workers who know them better because they've worked there for longer, I've noticed a pattern where they tend to have childhood trauma. And that's not that surprising, but it just brings to mind the question, how much is the trauma linked to their beliefs?
Yeah.
Would they have the schizophrenia or psychosis if it wasn't for the trauma? Because obviously there's the biological and what is it, diathesis stress model,
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that. Yeah,
diathesis stress. Yeah.
there's that model, but you can never really find out what's exactly causing the illness. And
No.
I've always been so curious to try and find this person's history. There's one in particular that's a good example where this woman has persecutory delusions, and she believes that people come into her bedroom through the window at night and attack her and
Oh, wow.
things like that. She gets really stressed out. She tries to call the police and things like that. So
Yeah.
she's had schizophrenia for a long time, but as it turns out, something actually happened to her when she was really little, where she was being abused, and she reported it and nobody believed her.
Oh, wow.
And so maybe that's partly because she'd been reporting a bunch of other things that weren't true because she had psychotic illnesses.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's because she had the predisposition, and as she grew up, these traumatic things happened to her, and it triggered her to be paranoid about everything
Yeah,
and be
yeah.
paranoid constantly. So
But I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's diathesis stress, like you say. It will be that predisposing factor, although that's not always the case. Sometimes there is no predisposing factor, or what's it called? Predetermined factor. And then the trauma definitely will play into that and create, like, you know, almost like PTSD, where it's like you're reliving the experience, the emotions stick with you. And so it comes out in the form of delusional beliefs, basically. And yeah, I do think that there's definitely a link between the trauma that people experience and their experience of psychosis in the future. It's actually something that really interested me. I have this notes page in my phone of ideas for my thesis if I ever get to write one.
Nice.
And that was one of them. The idea of like, what is it that creates the individual's delusional beliefs, basically, and why are they so specific to that person?
Interesting.
What is it in their life that brought that about? So yeah, it was something that I've definitely been fascinated by, and I do think there would be a lot of therapy around that if the person did get to receive therapy. A lot of their therapy would have been looking at that experience when that happened at the time and unpicking it and unpicking the emotions at play, so that they become less subconscious. They're brought to the forefront of the mind, and then that can sort of help with fueling that delusional belief because you understand it a bit better, and it's not just in the background anymore. It's sort of like at the forefront, and you're able to just understand it more. And so because you understand it more, it's not so foreign, and it's not like you're able to identify what that emotion is, where it's come from. And so you won't see it as like, I'm just scared now, I'm just scared of everything. It's sort of like you just get it a bit more.
Yeah.
Hard to explain. I'm not explaining it very well at all.
I think I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
And I guess it's kind of a pattern you see in therapy. Increasing your insight on what's happening gives you a sense of control.
Yeah,
so you
exactly.
feel less like you're afflicted by it, or you're under attack by your experiences, and
Yeah.
more like it's something you can understand and learn about.
100%. Yeah. You've explained that really well. That's perfect.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I was saying, that's something that I'm really eager to try and find out from these people, but I'm not in a position, I don't have the expertise to do that. And that's really cool that you're thinking of writing your thesis on that.
Yeah.
That's something that I would really read. Like, how do their experiences and their predispositions actually develop the material that they kind of... Material seems like a strange word, but it's hard to think of any word.
Yeah, I know what you mean. No,
Of the actual
that's it.
delusions.
Yeah,
and
like the
hallucinations.
fuel behind it. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, and it's just something that I've been curious about, and I've noticed it. Like you say, I've met people and they'll tell me about something that happened in their past, and then their trauma relates to their current delusional belief. And I'm sure there is papers already on it, to be honest, the correlation between the two. And it's just something that really fascinated me. And yeah, it's an idea that I'd already considered, definitely.
Yeah, my next question was going to be, have you had experiences that have kind of tentatively confirmed that hypothesis, that you've spoken to somebody and an aspect of their history links with an aspect of their delusional?
Yeah, exactly. Like really similar to the story you've told as well. Like I know of service users who experienced trauma when they were younger, and then they would be afraid of the same thing happening again in the future. I'm trying to not be too identifiable.
I know what
That's
you mean.
what I'm worried about.
Yeah.
But yeah. So like, for example, it could be something around like losing a child maybe, or losing like a loved one or something like that. And then you might have a delusional belief where you feel like they're still alive or they're still with you or they're speaking to you or something like that that's related to that person. And I do think it's around the emotions that happen at that time. So the emotions just stay with you, and as you relive the emotions, it's almost like the person's come back or it's happening again.
Yeah, interesting.
So yeah, and I think that's the fuel behind the delusional belief.
It's like inner unresolved conflicts kind of manifest. That's interesting. I'm always interested in those kind of, I guess it's kind of a psychoanalytic kind of approach to, it's the emotions have not been unpacked and they stay in the unconscious.
Yeah.
And then they kind of bubble up to the surface. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, psychosis, I think I had another question. Have you had any other particular areas? I know I kind of asked this before, but besides psychosis, anything that's interested you in particular to work with clinical populations? You said you mentioned autism, like you did autism assessments.
I did mention autism. So I always found autism to be quite fascinating. The service users who I worked with who had autism were always brilliant at something. And that's what I thought was just so special about it. So like, you know, I knew a service user who you could literally ask them to multiply any number by any number and they would be able to do it like that. So like it's sort of creates like genius in a way, but then it's also quite debilitating and can be really hard to live with in terms of like fixations and like the brain sort of fixating on certain things and then overthinking and ruminating. And yeah, also like the social interaction aspect to it. So it can sort of affect your ability to socialize with others and you get sort of social anxiety from it. So that can be quite difficult to live with, of course. So it has so many different aspects to it, but I don't know that much about it, to be fair. Like it's not something that I've looked into that deeply, but definitely the experiences that I've had, I've always thought that it's super interesting and it would be something that I'd want to look more at in the future. Yeah.
Did you work with autistic students in your TA?
Yes, I did. I worked with, one student who had that condition, and I think the way it manifests in children and adults is actually quite interesting, to be fair. I think that for children, it's almost like they just sort of see them as a naughty child. And it's like, oh, this child just doesn't want to learn and they're not listening to me. And they're not really considering that maybe they don't have the space in their mind to be able to pay attention to what it is that you want them to pay attention to, because they're already paying attention to whatever it is that fascinates them and interests them. And they're kind of fixated on that. So what you're teaching them just isn't relevant to them. And then the teacher might interpret that as they're naughty or they're not listening. It can also kind of manifest itself in like, you know, bad behavior, like violent behavior sometimes. And I think that's a case of maybe being a bit overstimulated. Classrooms can sometimes be really busy. Obviously, all the kids are all messing with each other and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of people in one room. So when an overstimulation happens, then sometimes the behavior that I noticed was a bit of lashing out. And I think that came from just not knowing how to handle the overwhelming situation. And I think I noticed that a lot more in children, like they're just not really able to literally handle the overstimulation and they just don't know what to do. So they sort of lash out. What I notice in adults is that they're able to handle it a bit better. They might handle it a bit more inward rather than outward. But they learn over time how to handle that, basically. So yeah, I suppose that's quite interesting as well. But yeah, I've worked with children and adults with the condition, and it's definitely something that I'd want to research or work with that client group again in the future. Yeah,
interesting. That was a question that I forgot to ask. When you worked in your assistant psychologist job, you said you did some autism assessments.
Yes.
Could you tell me a bit more about that and what the actual process is like?
Yeah, so we use the ethos, which is a clinical tool that is used to measure if someone does have autism or not, and then sort of the severity around it. And it contains lots of different tasks. So it's sort of like, I can't even remember it off the top of my head, but it's like a small different tasks. So like you might like play like a game, like it has little games that you do. And it's to sort of see how the service user interacts with you, if they're able to socially interact. It's looking for things like shared enjoyment and reciprocity and interaction. So the ability for me to say something and smile, and for them to say something back and smile at me, and like the social aspect to it. Then it does also contain an interview where you just ask people about their interests, their hobbies, their family life, their day-to-day, stuff like that. And you're basically building up a picture around what it is that they spend their time doing. And like it's looking at the different domains of like social interaction, but then also like fixations and rumination, and mostly things around that. It's mostly around social interaction and looking at that aspect of autism. Yeah.
It's really interesting that the assessment is less numbers based. Like I'm familiar with a couple things like the PHQ and GAD for depression, anxiety, which is straight numbers. It's really interesting that it relies, because you can complete those yourself, really.
Yeah.
It relies less on pure numbers and a little bit more on the expertise and just the intuition, I guess, of the assessor.
It's definitely like an interesting psychometric. Like I don't think I've really seen any other measure like it, where it's sort of like, it's almost like you're playing a game. Like it has like the actual toolkit for the ADOS has like toys in it and stuff, and like board games, and it's like a interactive fun experience. But then like, you know, other measures like you say, or like anxiety measures and stuff like that, where it's like, how often do you feel nervous? And then it's like on a scale of literally on a scale of 1 to 10 or something like that. So it's so different from that, definitely. But it's an interview, it's a semi-structured interview, so it's going for that sort of like interaction between the interviewer and the interviewee, rather than a survey style metric. So yeah, if that makes sense.
It's, I suppose hypothetically it's because autism is too broad of a spectrum to assess with some standardized questions, like 7 or 9 questions. So you mentioned reciprocity and you mentioned sort of social behavior. Can you give any examples of kind of things that you might look out for?
Yeah, so it would literally be things like facial expressions and body language, and just your feeling of how that person feels in the social interaction. So does it feel like they're enjoying it and they are gaining something from the social interaction, or does it feel like they're maybe not like enjoying it, or they're not there at all, like they're sort of pretending, or like how does it feel to you? Does it feel like a real conversation? Does it feel a bit strained or a bit awkward? And that's sort of what it's eliciting, and it's giving you different opportunities to observe those behaviors. It will also be the things that people say, like, are they trying to engage in conversation with you? Are they asking questions? Are they really blunted? So are they just answering like yes, no, or are they expanding on their answers? Are they sharing information about themselves, or are they like really closed off? So that's the sort of thing that it's trying to elicit.
And when you were learning to do that, did you feel like it was quite a difficult task to be able to do, or did you feel like your training and I guess your experience with working with people with autism trained you and prepared you enough to be able to do that confidently?
Oh no, I thought it was really hard the first time that I did it. I thought it was really difficult because I was like, I don't know what I'm looking for here. I think it literally came from practice, and also just spending time with those service users anyway. I think the more time I spent with them, the more I sort of understood how autism presents itself. And then I knew what I was looking for in an ADOS interview. So yeah, that was, but I definitely found it so difficult at first. Again, it's that imposter syndrome where you're just like, this is like way beyond my capabilities. But I do think that it's actually really simple when you break it down. You're just looking for, is this a soft and comfortable conversation? Like, is this like a conversation that I would expect to have day to day?
Yeah.
Is this like a nice interaction, or does it feel a bit awkward? And it's like all based on your humanness as well. It's a nice assessment to do because it's leaning into your ability to be human and to interact and have a conversation.
Yeah.
So
I guess you're just using your intuition for deviation from social norms.
Yes.
It's kind of an instinctual thing that you don't really learn, but you maybe learn how to deliver the assessment.
Yeah.
But you can it's interesting. You're relying on your human ability to understand the average of normal people. I shouldn't say normal, but the average of people.
Yeah, I know what you mean though.
And the statistical kind of deviation from that.
Yeah.
And social behaviors that are quite hard to measure numerically.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it basically can't be measured numerically. It kind of has to be measured from social interactions and from like, you know, what your expectation of a normal social interaction is and then how far away that is from it. But I've been trying to avoid the word normal, which is why I'm always searching for words.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. But like when you said like deviation from social norms, like that's like, it reminds me of like doing my undergrad and like the way that you learn it there, where you're like abnormal people, normal people, and like they might deviate from social norms or they might be like statistically anomalous and like that's not normal and like so that's always something that I've tried to steer clear of. But it's taught like that, and that's like kind of the understanding of psychology. And it kind of has to be in a way. It's really hard to figure out what else or what support you can provide to someone if you're not able to categorize what's going on for them. And to categorize it, you kind of have to compare it to the usual presentations and the way people are day to day. And then that sort of makes you accidentally say that that's not normal.
Yeah.
But it's hard though, isn't it? Because who's to say what's normal as well?
Yeah.
It's quite like it's quite a subjective decision to make whether something is normal or not normal.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think it's mainly tricky because technically the word normal may be correct because normal might technically mean what's the word? Concurrent with the average. But the issue is that normal has stigma.
Yeah.
So if you're not normal, it's like
it's a
but
bad
if you're
thing,
statistically deviant from the average, it doesn't sound that bad.
Yeah.
So I think it's really just the feelings associated with it and how it will affect people who hear it that might have autism or have other statistically deviant.
Yeah, you're completely correct. Right, it's about the stigma attached to it. That's really true. Yeah.
I think that's basically it for that. So I know you wanted to come on to talk about your project and talk about has there been anything that you've found, or is it too early?
It's too early to say. So it's literally in the recruitment stage right now. So we're just building up that cohort of people who are testing the app and the smartwatches. So it's too early to say.
Are you collecting data while you're recruiting as well?
Yes.
Cool.
So we've started collecting data, and each participant is in the study for a year, and they're wearing the watch every day and completing the questions, the self-report questions in the app every day. So there's so much data collected on each person, and that's because we're looking for that pattern in their mental health and their physical health through the smartwatch. But data collection started. It's a real challenge trying to navigate such a massive study, definitely, because it has so many moving parts. It has the physical health side to it with the passive data that's collected from the smartwatch, but then it also has the interview side to it. We're meeting with service users and interviewing them and trying to gauge their symptoms and things like that. And so, and it's recruiting a massive sample as well and so much data. So it does have definitely a lot of different moving parts and it's quite difficult to manage, but it also has such a good overarching point and reason that it exists. So I feel like that's a good motivation for the people who are working on it. It
has quite major clinical application. I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if it is found to work, then there's so many different uses that could be implemented in. So,
And I wonder what the implications would be for other mental health disorders besides psychosis. Maybe that's already been done. But it just seems...
Yeah, someone's asked me this before as well, that do you think it could be used for affective conditions like anxiety and depression? And I was like, I don't see why not, because it is the same sort of idea of if you're not feeling too good, if you're feeling low in mood, you might not leave the house as much, and so you're not doing as many steps. And so maybe it could be correlated in the same way. I think if we were to find that this does work and that you can monitor your mental health in this way, then it would get used in loads of other settings with lots of other client groups. Yeah.
I guess because your research is focused on psychosis, where relapse is more of a significant factor, perhaps than depression and anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. That's true, because it is more of like, it doesn't have that same wave of you're in the experience and then it's kind of gone. But it does to a certain extent. Like, people go through depressive episodes.
And even like bipolar disorder comes to mind.
And bipolar can sometimes present itself with psychosis symptoms as well. So, I think bipolar would be a really good one.
Interesting stuff.
For this. I mean, you could use it now with bipolar because it's for psychosis. So it doesn't necessarily need to be schizophrenia. It's just the experience of psychosis, which can come from other conditions as well as schizophrenia, like bipolar.
Is it fair to say psychosis is less of a disorder in itself and more of like a construct, or
it's the
symptoms?
Experience.
Okay.
It's the experience. So it's the set of symptoms of the either hallucinations and delusions or like the negative symptoms. So like not being able to, like, a loss of speech or like loss of emotions and things like that. But it is an umbrella, and then lots of other conditions can cause psychosis. Like, so it means that you could definitely use it with bipolar, probably, because it's just sort of looking for that experience, that detachment from reality experience. Yeah,
that's interesting. I guess that's important to remember, that psychosis is can be seen with many different disorders.
Yes.
It's not
its own disorder. Yeah, it's not its own diagnoses.
Yeah. And my other question was going to be, when you mentioned you've had experience assessing participants face to face. How has your experience been with that? Has that been interesting?
Yeah, really interesting. We use a range of measures to try and assess someone's symptoms, so to sort of categorize how much experience of psychosis they're having. And we do that in a semi-structured interview with a range of different measures. And that's been really interesting. Like I said, it's such an individual experience. Every participant has a different story. It's been really, really good. That side of it is definitely something I enjoy. And it was the reason actually why I was so hopeful to get the research assistant role on Connect, because I really wanted that opportunity to have patient contact and to be able to make a difference to people's lives in the future, but to still have the opportunity to meet with service users and hear their experiences day to day. I wanted it to be part of my day-to-day work, as well as doing that, building something that's going to help people in the future. I still wanted it to be part of my day-to-day. So I was looking for that nice balance between clinical and research. And I think that this role is really good for that.
Sounds ideal.
Yeah.
And I'm interested, when you speak to participants, do they tend to, I guess by the nature of them being participants, they've provided informed consent.
Yes.
Do they tend to have insight on their illness?
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of participants who have really good insight, who have a really good handle over their psychosis, and they know when it's getting worse, and they know when they're getting better, and they know that, I've heard people call their experience a hallucination. I know I'm hallucinating. I know this is delusional. People have definitely said that before. It really depends. I think when people start doing therapy, you sort of pick up the language that the therapist is using, and it's like psychoeducation. It teaches you what's going on. So I think you can really tell when someone's had that sort of experience, and the language that they'll use, and just the understanding of it. And it does help with the severity of the experience as well, because when you understand something, it's not as terrifying or scary anymore.
I can see that, yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely the case. But then on the other side, you've got people who would not hear the idea that that's not the true reality.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
mixture.
that's interesting because my experience with people with schizophrenia or other psychotic illnesses so far has been at the mental health care home. And for all sorts of reasons, I think that those
Yeah.
people tend to not have insight.
Yeah,
However,
yeah,
they
yeah.
tend to know that they have schizophrenia because they've been to hospital and they've been prescribed medication. They'll even say, I started taking this medication for my schizophrenia.
Yeah, yeah.
But nonetheless, they'll be convinced of their delusions when they,
Very
at all
expectant.
times,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So I guess it's an interesting thing where people can have a level of insight, but they're battling against the delusions they can't help but believe at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's like almost like if you're just so sure of something, like if someone was to try and tell you the sky is purple and you're like, I'm so
Yeah.
sure it's blue. So it's like, even if someone says you've got schizophrenia, you might know that you've got schizophrenia, but it doesn't matter. The sky is blue.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah,
So
it's that
interesting.
sort of vibe. Yeah.
And that's what makes me really interested in how schizophrenia is treated. And I know that medications are generally really effective, but
Yeah.
Psychotherapeutically, I'm really interested in how schizophrenia is
Yeah.
treated. I'm wondering if you've managed to learn anything about that so far in your career.
Yeah, so I know that people can get CBT for psychosis. So that's a talking therapy, and that would be sort of like I'm not like, qualified to talk about CBT, but from my understanding, it's sort of reorganizing your thoughts and sort of like trying to view it in another way. So I've never been in a session of CBT, nor have I observed one, so I don't know. But I know that you can definitely get CBT for psychosis, and I think it would be around trying to relabel these thoughts in your mind. So maybe not seeing it as so. Yeah, you're basically trying to correct the thoughts. So like not seeing it as true anymore. But I'm not sure the steps involved in that. I
Yeah.
don't really know how it comes about. I know it takes a really long time.
Yeah.
And I know that when it's severe, so like the people that you've been working with, that wouldn't work for them. It needs to be like, you need to be kind of stable and in sort of stable place to be able to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why medication is like the kind of go-to
Yeah.
treatment for psychosis.
Yeah.
But, I've always thought that medication should be used in conjunction with therapy because medication doesn't cure anything. It just masks the symptoms.
Yeah.
And if you do CBT successfully, you can gain that insight like we're talking about, and it will reduce the symptoms and reduce the severity of it. So, I think talking therapy with medication is probably the best remedy.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That's really insightful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that's been bugging me a lot thinking about that. Working in the care home, and I've just thought, if only I was a clinical psychologist, and if only I knew enough, and if only I was like the leading expert in this field, would there be something I could do to sit with these people and get a bit closer to them having a better quality of life day to day? And I can only imagine how difficult it would be, because CBT, I imagine, is hard enough to try and change people's minds about whatever they're ruminating on or catastrophizing. But for somebody where that is their illness and that is even their predisposition, it might be a question that I struggle with for the rest of my life. But it's surely there's something you can do.
You should get a CBT therapist on here and they can give you the full explanation, because I'm sure I'd be so interested to hear that actually, the step-by-step process to it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's definitely around correcting thoughts. And I think for all severe mental conditions, I think that it's a case that your thoughts have kind of got a bit out of control, whether it's like you're really worried, so you've got anxiety, or you're thinking so much about like sad things and you feel so sad, and so it's all about like correcting the thoughts and sort of bringing them back into like reality and into like a manageable scope. So that's what my understanding of CBT would be for psychosis, would just be kind of correcting the thoughts, and I'm sure it will be a really long process.
Yeah.
And it's not going to work for everyone as well. It wouldn't be successful for everyone. And because psychosis is such like a chronic condition as well, like a lot of people will just live their whole lives with it. And it comes in relapses as well. So you could live for a really long time with psychosis as a diagnosis, but not experience anything really, or have like tiny experiences that don't mean much. So it sometimes doesn't need CBT. Sometimes it's just like you know, you can find the right medications that work for you. Or sometimes you can have CBT and then be able to come off medication. So it completely depends on the individual and how severe it was for them in the beginning. But it is quite a long-lasting condition.
Yeah.
So sometimes CBT just won't be effective. I think it really depends on the individual. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I suppose with all that being said, it's useful to have some awareness and have some insight of maybe when your symptoms are going to get worse, symptoms are going to get better.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
really useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting stuff. I just want to ask before we close, do you think there's anything that we've missed, anything interesting that you want to add?
No, I feel like this has been a really nice conversation. I mean, I just wanted to come on here and speak a little bit about the University of Manchester research that's going on, and then also just talk about the doctorate in clinical psychology. I just feel like it's such an interesting topic, and if anyone can take any advice out of anything that I've said, even if it's just hearing my experience, is sometimes nice to just hear how it's been for other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like that could be really useful to aspiring psychologists.
Yeah, well, it's been really useful for me personally. I think I find it really insightful.
Brilliant.
So yeah, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Good luck with the rest of your waiting time in your application.
Thank you.
I guess there's no luck really at this point, it's just waiting.
Yeah,
so
fingers crossed.
fingers crossed. Yeah, thank you very much.
Cheers.